Hello everyone, Andrew here. So my presentation that I have for you today will be focusing on the two film responses that I wrote during the semester. In this presentation, I'll be going over what I wrote and what I rewrote in my film responses, as well as providing you guys with some historical analyses, plot summaries, and some accuracies and inaccuracies that I found while watching these films. So to start off, I watched two films this semester, Confucius and Chunhyang. I'll first be going over Confucius. So Confucius, as the title implies, is a 2010 Chinese film about the renowned philosopher Kongqi, also known in the West as Confucius. So a brief summary of this film is that the film is about Confucius during the Warring States period and how he utilized his newfound power as the minister of law to help settle some moral dilemmas and some ethical problems that we see throughout the film, such as the case with the slave and how she was going to be buried alive with her master. And in the film, Confucius also faces a set of other problems and hardships, and then eventually he becomes this wandering intellectual, this wandering teacher with a loyal band of followers. Now, going into some accuracy and inaccuracies, one of the things that the film does right is its portrayal of the Warring States period. The Warring States period was a time of Chinese history where, you know, everything was in chaos. You had multiple kingdoms and multiple warlords all competing for control of China, and this was done through violent conquest, this was done through strife, this was done through war. And it was not a peaceful time. So, as a result, many governments in China began to implement legalism, okay, which is a form of government in which harsh punishments are given to lawbreakers in hopes that other citizens will follow the law and be good. Now, during the time periods like these, Confucius and Mencius both wanted to promote stability and peace through benevolence and some integrity within leadership. They argue that if we have like these good benevolent leaders in power, that citizens will follow the law not out of fear, but out of genuine trust and actually wanting to be good citizens. So, the thing about the Warring States period is that it lasted from 475 to 221 BC. And in the film, we do see a lot of war. We see some invasions of the kingdom. We see, a lot of fighting. So yeah, it was pretty accurate in terms of portraying what life could have been like during this period. And an inaccuracy that I saw in the film was the story of Confucius himself. Now, Confucius in reality was never a high-ranking government official or an imperial advisor that he hoped to be. He was just a regular scholar with a following, and sometimes he'd try and influence, some significant government officials, but he didn't have any formal position of power. So going into the writing process of my first draft for Confucius, I had to rework a lot of the first draft. For example, okay, for example, I had to rework the last part of my introductory paragraph and put more, context and emphasis on, when I talk about certain Confucian practices such as ritual, the part where I talk about how Confucius is seen bowing in front of an important building in the beginning of the film. And so going back to what I reworked in my introductory paragraph, I had to rework the last part of it because Dr. Umbrello left a comment first on my first draft, saying that, hey, I see your point in this, but it's better to just rework this because it doesn't have, any historiographical connection. So I had to get rid of that. And another thing that I had to do was put more historical context regarding Confucius's reputation throughout Chinese history, because we know that he was both revered and despised throughout various eras of Chinese history that came after him. One example that, I had to provide more context was when I talked about how Confucius was despised during the Maoist era of China, especially during the Cultural Revolution, in which a lot of people, many people under the influence of Mao Zedong were encouraged to discard the old ways of thinking, discard the old traditions that were obstacles for, the progressive communist, ideology that the government at the time was trying to push. So I wrote about how Confucius was seen as, being responsible for instilling these old and like these backward values that essentially kept China as a quote unquote feudal state, all right, for a millennia. And overall, I also had to fix some grammatical formatting and some spelling issues as well. So overall, I'd say that Dr. Umbrello and the comments that he left on my first draft, that helped me to go back, take another look at my sources, and put some more thought into the providing a more historiographical analysis of the film. And it was through that I was able to, rewrite my paper and make some improvements to it. So yeah, um that was my experience with Confucius. Going on to the next film is Chunhyang. So Chunhyang is a 2000 Korean film that takes place during the Choson dynasty in the 17th century. So to briefly summarize the film, the tale the plot centers around these two lovers, Lee Mungryong, the son of a governor, and Chunhyang, the daughter of a courtesan. Now both of them, Mungryong falls in love with Chunhyang quite literally at first sight, and eventually the two end up getting married, although Chunhyang isn't as, submissive or accepting of it at first. Eventually the two, yeah, they get married. They There's a short period of time where they're just a regular, happy couple, but they also had to keep it secret from Mungryong's father. And eventually the two lovers are separated when Mongryong and his family had to go to Seoul in order to fulfill some other political responsibilities. Chunhyang becomes depressed and very saddened by the absence of her husband, and in the meanwhile, a new governor takes control of the town of Namwan, where they're both from, and this new governor is shown to be very corrupt and also tries to make romantic advances toward Chunhyang, which she refuses, and as a result, she's punished for this by being beaten in public and being imprisoned. When Mongryong finally becomes a noble and returns to Namwan after 3 years, he learns that Chunhyang is going to be killed by the governor on on his birthday, and as a result, Mongryong devises up a plan and arrests the new governor and some of his cronies, and then the two lovers are finally reunited. So some accuracies and inaccuracies. I feel like the film, in general, is a somewhat accurate portrayal or actually a pretty accurate portrayal of life, what life could have been like during the 17th century Korea in the Choson dynasty. I In the film, I you see more of like the how life was like for the lower class through Chun Hyang, who's the daughter of a courtesan, and then you see what life was like for the higher class during this time period, which is Lee Mung Ryong. And event. Another thing that was very notable about this film was its use of pansori. Now, pansori is a style of storytelling in Korea which involves a narrator and a drummer, and the narrator is just poetically singing, okay, the story, and the film cuts in between the the actual plot with the characters, and then it cuts to a modern day pansori performance in South Korea, and much of the pansori narrator's dialogue is substituted into the character's dialogue, which helps to you know channel the emotions and the energy of the characters and the certain settings that we see throughout the film. So in my writing, I wrote about how the film is symbolic of the gender roles that we see in ancient Korea, with men being, portrayed as the stronger sex, having high positions of power and being, fearless, and the women being portrayed as being weak, the weaker sex that's emotionally dependent on their husbands and having low titles in society and just being reduced to mere wives. Um, I also wrote about, in my historiographical analysis, how the film could be interpreted as, you know, Korea's, as, you know, something to inspire Korean nationalism, and how the Koreans dealt with their experiences with colonialism from the Japanese, and how and how and how they confront, some of their past. So overall, about during the writing process, some things I had to rework was condensing the long summary that I put in my first draft. Dr. Umbrello said it was a good summary, but it took up quite, some space, and I had to simplify it in order to include the historical issues and historiographical analysis to my paper. And also another thing Dr. Umbrello helped me to rework was when he left a comment about how the film in my last paragraph could also be interpreted as the and as Korean unification, how the film could be symbolic of that, the reunification of the Korean peninsula to one nation. And of course, I had to fix some grammatical and spelling errors, and I just had to provide a bit more historiographical context and analysis. But yeah, so overall, yeah, so one more thing I want to mention is that in my writing, I also incorporated the article by Stella Miyoshi Jaeger titled Woman and the Promise of Modernity, a Sign for Love of the Nation in Korea. And I was able to, mention like how this other Korean author, Yi Kwang-soo, rewrote the original Chun-hyung story that the film was based off of to, make women appear as like the stronger sex, or women have been recasted as the stronger sex, and men are recasted as the weaker sex, and how the female character is rescued by another woman. But yeah, so overall, Dr. Umbrello and his comments on my second paper helped me to, you know, take another look at, what I wrote and add more onto my paper. So yeah, overall, some closing statements I want to make. In conclusion, Dr. Umbrello's comments that he left obviously helped me to, improve my writing, improve my film responses, and help me provide a more adequate historiographical analysis of these films. Um, I hope to I hope to look at all of your other guys' videos and film responses and provide you guys with some feedback. I had a good time this semester. I always like learning about different cultures. Overall, yeah, I enjoyed doing this project and watching those films. Yes. Thank you for listening.